Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very accomplished professional and an author from Canberra, Australia, Dr. Kirsten Peterson. Kirsten, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Kirsten is a high-performance mindset expert, a performance psychologist with deep experience in the world of Olympic sport, and she's an author. And all of you know I've always been very partial to authors. She's an author of a book titled When Grit Is Not Enough, and we'll speak about that. So, Kirsten, before we talk about high performance, tell me about your own journey and what inspired you to specialize in high performance psychology.
I grew up a child of the 1960s, which will date me, at a time when women's sport was not very prevalent. So I was an athletic girl in the wrong decade. And my dad had to start a softball league in our hometown, so I had an opportunity to play. My friends and I wanted desperately not just to be sidelined. And so he was really instrumental in giving me agency to become an athlete. And then in college, I was there to be a softball pitcher and lost the ability to throw strikes. And now I look back, I think it was a case of the yips, but we didn't know what it was back then. So then that drew me into how to help somebody like me who had all the physical capabilities, but wasn't able to pull some kind of trigger. And so I've never pitched since. I've played other positions in softball. And that just drove me into sports psychology, like this idea of loved sport, loved this idea of helping athletes not feel what I had felt. And at that time, there was no solution for me. And in possibly the worst career choice ever, fell into, through good associations, my first job out of graduate school was with the U.S. Olympic Committee as a sports psychologist. And so you go from graduate school to, zero to hero. And that led to pretty much a good 5 years of imposter syndrome for me. But I've got an awesome work experience. And so I got drawn in for those reasons, a love of psychology, a love of helping people, incredible work colleagues who were all really good and passionate about what they did. So the environment was super helpful. Of course, I burned out after 14 years, which is a whole nother story that led me to Australia. But I would say that what fires me up now that I'm my own employer, because like you kind of went out and get to do things your own way. My business mantra is that high performance shouldn't hurt people.
Right.
And I've seen too many ways in which we, under the guise of either long hours or super efforts or selfless performance, we break ourselves on the altar of performing well. And that's my job now, is to fix that for people.
Well said. And Kirsten, how would you define high performance?
That's really, I define it. There are inexorable outcomes depending on whatever domain of excellence that you're in. So if it's a lawyer, it's this, it's success in the courtroom. If it's athlete, it's winning and losing. So there's things that measure performance that are quantitative, I guess is the word. Every domain has it. Real estate, how many houses you sold. But equally, in my view, it's how we take care of the performer along the way. So my question to groups often is, hey, say you're a group of doctors. How do you define high performance? Well, it's saving patients on the table. All right, so what comes first, the performance or the performer? And you'll get a tick, 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 and somebody will finally say performer. And I say, are you asking me or are you telling me? So getting to your question, high performance, in my view, is when the performer is valued as much as the performance on the way to high performance, so that the high performance becomes sustainable. So, the difference between one and a trend of high performance, and you would know based on your business background that anybody can be a one-shot wonder in business, but how do you keep it going? To me, true high performance is human-centered and sustainable.
Very well said. Great response. Thank you. And
Thank you.
Kirsten, how do the principles of performance psychology apply to athletes and corporate leaders?
My today's response, because I've done a lot of thinking about this as I pivot more into the business space, is that the world we travel in, be it elite sport, and elite sport has its own set of challenges. You are high profile and you're completely visible, right? You know, it's not the athlete who sits in the backyard and does amazing things, but you're on TV and everyone's watching you.
Right.
And it's a one-shot thing. That's a series of challenges with everybody in the world getting it's better all the time. In business, and you could speak to this more than me, but what I'm seeing is a world that's going faster and faster. So, and urgency is increasing, tribalism. So the idea of how to relate to each other, I think we took a big step back with COVID. And those challenges exist, right? In the world. So I'd say the challenges might specifically be different, but the idea of complexity and urgency is there. So if all that is happening, no matter what the domain is, the final frontier for us to be as effective as possible as performers is to become aware of and able to work as productively and as friendly a way as possible with our own minds and bodies to give ourselves a fighting chance.
Right.
To manage the challenges out there. But the inside, we often gloss right over it and jump right into the challenges, not knowing if we are a product of chronic stress, irrepressible anger, like a toxic inner critic, imposter syndrome, which I can speak from personal experience, saps so much creativity and energy. So if to be high performance in this space is to at least value that which is unseen. And that's part of the problem, is we don't value it because we don't see it. And that in getting that right, we make our performance easier. And in getting it right, we're less likely to spread the contagion of our own inner crap onto the people we lead. Because, you know, when you've got an inner critic, you know, the first thing you do is you jump on everyone around you.
Well said. And what role does mental health play in achieving and maintaining high performance?
It is as fundamental as physical health, right? You know, we wouldn't, you know, if we had the flu, we know we'd be suffering and not able to do the things we need to do. Or if we'd broken a leg, we'd accommodate for that. Mental health is like a stable basis from which we can operate. So, you know, we can all think about, even mental health fluctuates even over the course of a day, you know, so we think of mental health as like, you know, depression or anxiety, but really it's the fluctuations of how we feel mentally, emotionally all the time. And it's only when it becomes more chronic that we start to label it with something like depression, which you'd have to feel depressed for at least 2 weeks before you get a diagnosis, which is a long time, right? But in the appreciation of our mood, in the appreciation of our emotions, and becoming friendly with them rather than hating on fear and then trying to repress it. Like they all play, so we want to play with them well. That's a sign of good mental health. And when we can do that with some skill and some awareness and some kindness to our inner condition, we're going to be not only better humans, but much better leaders. And so I do want to underscore that because mental health is unseen. It's so easy to misinterpret, or we've made all sorts of, you know, the stigma of mental health being a sign of weakness if you're not feeling well and all that business, certainly not helping the case, right? So one of my jobs is to advocate for the equivalency of physical and mental health. If we're talking about making accommodations for physical health, and we're not talking about making a similar accommodations, like, I don't know if you know, Naomi Osaka famously went up against the French Open because they weren't allowing mental health accommodations after. Anyway, all that being said.
That's true. That's true. Thank you.
I may have overshot your question.
No, not at all. And, you know, when I was preparing to have this conversation with you, I was fascinated about, you know, your interest in Buddhism as well. So my question is, how does your approach integrate neuroscience and Buddhist contemplative insights?
Because it turns out they were a marriage made in heaven.
Yes.
I, in becoming interested in meditation initially only to teach athletes, I was never going to meditate, but I thought it'd be a good thing. It's one of the few mind training practices available to us these days. But in learning the principles underpinning it, principles such as equanimity, which is such a goldmine of opportunity. This idea of just being able to kind of take life on its own terms has such good, like the more we learn through neuroscience imaging about when accomplished meditators are able to calm the emotional centers of their brains, which gives the prefrontal cortex, or our decision-making centers, more of a chance to operate during high-stress situations. There's nothing, you can just, for skeptics, I don't say I'm a Buddhist, but I do say I'm a neuroscientist, or I understand neuroscience. And when you paint the brain science, it could be a way in if they're not into wanting it to have a religious overtone, but they're doing the same thing.
Correct. Well said. And what would you say are some key practices for cultivating self-compassion and self-awareness?
Oh, how much time do we have? Well, I'll take the second one first, in that self-awareness, such an interesting term, because there's a hidden paradox there, or hidden blind spot, in that we so often don't know when we aren't. And when we don't know that we aren't, we assume that we are. And so it can be as simple as taking the time to ask, am I aware? What am I feeling inside? What am I feeling outside? And allowing the answers to come, rather than telling yourself, I feel so calm, when in fact my heart rate is going a million miles an hour. Getting accurate to read what's happening is something we don't take the time to practice. And so I'm even as simple as, am I aware? Because without awareness, we can't be compassionate, because we don't know when we're suffering, right? So when we think about self-compassion, is this, well, first let's start back up, and we'll say compassion is the act of suffering with.
Right.
So when someone else is suffering, it's our ability to come in, not to solve problems necessarily, but to give the hug, or say, this sounds really tough, but I'm with you. We're sitting shoulder to shoulder during your suffering. Creates that, a burden halved is a burden shared is a burden halved kind of feeling. So self-compassion is that very same willingness to be with ourselves when we are suffering. And there are many reasons we are culturally conditioned not to do this. It's soft, it's weak. You'll never get anywhere if you're nice to yourself. Stiff upper lip and all that business. So there's lots of ways in which we've unconsciously taken that away from us as a skill. But this ability to sit with and do this. So the practice, you and I are going to do it together. Okay, we're all on. Put your hand on your heart. I'm asking you to do this right now. Thank you. And I want to think about a time when I have suffered. Maybe I had an argument with my spouse. And I just say, that was tough. And just acknowledging that, they didn't go the way I wanted it to. That is one of the most fundamental acts of self-compassion we can offer. And I know when I remember to do it, it's like, oh, yeah, it was. And then you can go on to say things like, I've got my own back, we're here in this together kind of thing. But again, the burden shared is a burden halved, even when it's just with ourselves.
Correct.
And I will say that while people will say that sounds soft and squishy, that is a resilience builder. It's one of the hardest and most important things we can do.
Absolutely.
So self-awareness gets us into the
you're
arena.
so right. Admitting to yourself is one of the most difficult and yet one of the most gratifying things we can do to ourselves, So, but coming back to few more questions for you.
Yes.
How do you determine when it's better to quit rather than persist in an effort?
It's such a great question because I wrote that book, When Grit
Yeah.
Is Not Enough, to save myself because I
Mhm.
am a terrible quitter. So it was really interesting to even contemplate that.
Yeah.
But it is we have so many sort of self-defeating ways of thinking, particularly if we are prone to
Mm.
overgritting or to see ourselves as never quitting. In at least in America where I was raised, now that I live in Australia, there was this, you just keep going. Look at Thomas Edison, 5,000 fails before he made the light bulb, and all these kind of things in our culture that say this is the way to go.
Mm.
So first of all, it's kind of fighting that and recognizing that there's conditioning here. Um, but then it really is being able to look at asking those hard questions. Is this getting me where I want to go? Is this serving the same purpose it did when I started? And how many times do we stay in something simply because we made the investment at the beginning?
Mm.
As simple as eating the restaurant meal you didn't like, or that was too much food because you paid for it. Like the smart quit would be not to kill yourself any more than you have to. So I think the first step is just asking, but the second step is allowing that there is such a thing as the smart quit.
Mm.
And if you are in the wrong place, you're in the wrong job, you're in the wrong relationship, and you know it. So it's not to say you quit everything you do, but you examine it. If I'm prone not to doing it, and are the reasons I'm not doing it here is crystal clear to me, or am I doing it because not quitting is not okay? Does that, if I know it's a simple answer, but it would be hard to go into more detail in the time we have. But it's simply asking, like sometimes
Yeah.
when we can quit something that is not that's not serving us to move on to something that will. How do you want to live your life?
Said. Well said. One more question, and then I want to move to your book.
Okay.
How can organizations foster a culture that supports high performance?
Such a topical question. Just spent some time with an organization I work with answering that question. And I love that you put culture and high performance into the same sentence, because I find too often that culture is sort of this touchy-feely thing over here, and I don't really have anything to do with it, and then we still have to perform, so they don't, when in fact, I made the distinction in this recent work about the culture of we're all high performers. There's a culture there. So there's a seduction there that if everybody's smart where I'm working and I'm part of that culture, it must mean I'm smart too. And so I have to keep up appearances of looking like a high performer while killing my own performance. So the difference between a culture of high performers and a high performance culture means we take care of our performers. And the things that we talked about, you can do programs, but there's 1%ers every day that you do. Management, asking, developing relationships with key people. Maybe you can't be with everybody, but if it's a small firm, you should be. And how do you care? Because what you want to do is create the psychological safety that people can say if they're not doing okay. But in so many places, if I'm a high performer, I can't say that. And we're asking you to be both at the same time. So it's a culture of care that comes across. It's training, it's so like it's providing training. So you're not throwing people in untrained to do work that just undermines their performance because they can't do what you're asking them to do. And it's also saying that well-being is part of our culture, that how you feel. How's your mental health? How's your physical health? That's part of the performance. But what I see happening in lots of places, that's personal. That's not part of this.
Right.
And yet we want you to be working 16-hour days. Well, Jesus, when are you supposed to take care of that? So caring and owning that all of this is well-being is professional, and making sure training is fit for purpose are things that come to mind immediately.
Thank you. I'm now going to move to your book, Kirsten. Your book is When Grit Is Not Enough, and I'm going to ask all our viewers and listeners to go and check Dr. Kirsten Peterson's book on Amazon. I'm going to check it myself. So, Kirsten, tell me a little bit about your book and what was your hypothesis when you wrote it?
It's funny. I think the hypothesis came well before the title, but the trigger for me was during COVID, when I saw a couple of scenarios play out that I didn't expect. And most tellingly was that there was a subclass of athletes and coaches who I really suspected were gonna, they were just good at getting the job done. Why would a pandemic make anything any different? But they floundered during the profound uncertainty that at least the beginning of COVID brought to us, with border closures, competitions moving, practices moving, people couldn't train where they wanted, couldn't train together. So it was a level of uncertainty that we had never seen in the Olympic movement since World War II, frankly. First time since World War II that the Olympic Games were delayed. I think it was first ever 5-year quadrennium, and that when the Tokyo Games were delayed. And so some of the grittiest subclass of grittiest coaches and athletes fell apart the worst. And that was a first tip to me, like when you're used to working hard toward very linear set goals, because that's elite sport is nothing, but ahead of time when the Olympics are happening, what are the key competitions, everything's laid out. When that blows up, grit often does not serve you, because you're gritting mindlessly toward what? And so in one case that comes to mind for me, a national coach actually shed a quarter of the national team, including some who had made the Olympic team, because they were just like, what is the point of training exactly as hard when the games are 13 months away as if they were a month away? And people could see no point. And they went off with like, I was going to retire, but it seems like this is not serving me, and like lost really talented athletes. On the other side of things, because of course I didn't have anything to do because my business had fallen apart because of COVID. So I had all this time to interview people. So I interviewed another coach, and his response was so different. He was telling me about how many sports psychologists he had working with his team. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. What aspects of performance are they working on? And he just put his hand up to the Zoom camera. He's like, we are not talking about performance right now. I was like, oh, really? It's all about mental health. Right now, we've got people who don't know what's going to happen. It's hard to have trained. We're a team sport. We can't train as a team sport. I'm having town halls with parents about what we're doing to help their this was a college coach, so the kids were living here, and really trying to tend to the team around the team and keep people's spirits up and give them reason to keep going when there wasn't a lot going on. But I love the juxtaposition between it is about mental health versus blind adherence to performance was really where the book was born.
Very interesting. So my last question to you, and again about your book, what are some misconceptions about grit in the context of achieving success that you have defined in your book?
And if Angela Duckworth is listening, I hope she'll agree with what I'm about to say. I did get a chance to talk to her. She wrote the book Grit, and I would just say that she's the expert. That just like anything else, it can be overused. It sounds, when that book first came out, it was like a panacea for high performance. We just have to teach people these qualities around passion plus perseverance. And, that's her mission, to help kids in particular develop more of this. But it is when grit is already part of the operating system, how to use it judiciously. Because you think about anything, a little bit of iron supplementation was good, more must be better, or a little bit of training is good, more must be better. And we can see the fallacy of these kinds of ideas, that there's an inverted view of relationship with almost anything good in our lives. And so it is when, particularly during times of uncertainty and change, when the goalposts are shifting more often, you can't even see what the goalposts are. It's then attending to, maybe with grit, but maybe with compassion, to how I am feeling. I can see myself. What's going on right now that I can attend to.
Right.
And being smart about what that is. So I could grittily beat myself up for not knowing the future. And I certainly saw athletes and coaches doing this, where it was like, I hate this. I hate this, and I don't know when I'm going to compete again. And it's like, uncertainty doesn't hate you.
Correct.
So we need to work on our reaction to this uncertainty, and that's job one. And it may be as far away from grit as possible, but that's going to be the thing that's going to prepare us the most for when grit can be then employed for the next grand thing.
Very interesting. Kirsten, on that note, I just want to say thank you so much for speaking to me about your own journey. Thank you for speaking to me about high performance. And, I learned so many new things from you today about performance psychology, about how your expertise is from the world of Olympic sports is now actually pivoting into the world of the corporate, into the corporate world. Thank you also for speaking to me about your book, When Grit Is Not Enough. Thank you again and good luck.
I would just like to say I am professionally trained to speak for long periods of time without taking a breath. You let me exercise that muscle, and it's been a joy being able to unpack this with you. So thanks for some great questions and the ability and the opportunity. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.